Could you please join me in welcoming two of our very amazing Amazon sellers, Krista and Jason Tay, up to the stage. Okay, so this will be an interactive session where we give two experienced sellers two hypothetical situations where they first have $40,000 to start their business, and secondly, if they only have $10,000 to start their business. So what we hope for you to take away from this discussion is the different perspectives and considerations on what to prioritize for your own brand on Amazon.com. So just, to quickly start things off, maybe Jason and Crystal, could you quickly, introduce yourselves?
Ladies first.
Thank you, Jason. Hi, everyone. You guys might already know me from this morning's session. So my name is Crystal. I basically launched and built a couple Amazon brands, 6-7 figures, and exit one under 1.5 years. So my category is in home decor and beauty categories.
Okay, my name's Jason. I was standing at the back and it was pretty hard to hear and distracting. So everybody good?
Can you hear us?
All right, I've been selling on Amazon for a long time, about 10 years. I started really small and then scaled it to 6, then 7 figures. Most recently, earlier this year, we registered a second company and we actually acquired a brand that's already on Amazon. Yep. That's
okay, thank you both. Yeah, it sounds like both of them have lots of experience to share with the both of you. So just a quick recap. So as a basis of this session, I asked both of our sellers the question. So if you had $40,000 to kickstart your Amazon business, how would you allocate this $40,000? And this was their responses. So you can see on the left and on the right, this is how they would allocate their $40,000 on Amazon. So yeah, maybe Jason, you can first walk us through very briefly, how would you allocate the $40,000?
Okay, you have 3 seconds to take a picture. No, it's going to stay there for a while. For me, my main takeaway, I guess, on the slide is, I said I would divide it and do 5 products. My track record is I usually have an 80% success rate. So if I launch a product, in the last 5 years, every product I've launched, about 80% of it will become successful. That means I keep selling it. It's not something that dies. So I would do 5 products and yep.
Yeah, what about you, Krista?
Yeah, so my success rate is very similar to Jason's. Usually I have 75 to 80% success rate in whatever product I launch. By success, I mean like at least break even. But in this case, I would do, it really depends on how you want to do it, because you can hedge your bets like Jason. You do 5 products, and if your success rate is 80%, then 4 of them would become, will break even in the end. But in this case, just to kind of demonstrate another scenario that you could be in, I would do 1 product, but put my eggs in this one basket like more carefully. So I think for $40,000 in comparison with $10,000, you have more like resources, almost like bullet that you can fire when you go to the war, right? Because you have $30,000 more, and that give you an edge of choosing your product, right? So you can choose something a little bit more expensive. Say, maybe with $10,000, you can only choose a little bit cheaper products, but with $40,000, you can choose something like $100, $200, or you can afford to go to a more saturated market, but buy more units that you can essentially initially have a little bit of a cheaper price strategy and then dominate the market, and then perhaps later on you expand from there. But essentially, these are the 2 ways I will go about. So in this case, I choose a more expensive products to begin with.
Okay, so this is how they would allocate their $40,000. So now, what if you had $10,000? So what are the essential items that you would prioritize? Maybe share with us what the differences. Yeah.
Okay, the difference if you had a lower budget is you have to, like Crystal was mentioning, you have to be really careful. If you take aim, you want to make sure you hit the target. Otherwise, you'd use up all your ammunition. So I would actually it's not on the slide, but I would be really careful in terms of product research. I have several criteria that I would use to make sure it's profitable, that there's demand and the competition is low and weak enough. Because if I have $10,000 only, that I don't have much to spend on marketing, advertising. And so I probably want to go for something with relatively low competition. Because if you go for a highly competitive market, you're going to need to burn a lot of money. I always say, if you want to sell Bluetooth earbuds or speakers, for example, you're going to have to compete against Bose, Sony, Anker. For them, they have hundreds of millions in marketing budget. They can do like $100 a click in PPC. For me, I want to do 80 cents per click. So you know what? I'm not going to play in their, field.
What about you, Crystal?
Yeah, so I think, 100% agree with Jason. I'm just going to add a few points. I think that, in this environment, if you have $10,000, and we're probably going to go into the detail later, but you can see very quickly, you spend a few $1,000s on incorporation, your trademark, and you spend maybe like half of it in inventory. So you really don't have a lot in terms of marketing. So you really wanted to choose somewhere where it is not saturated and it's a niche. Think about it as like if you only have $10,000, your potential reward of this $10,000 might be lower as well because the investment you go into it is going to be low as well, right? Which is okay, because then you can, once you start to generate a bit more cash, you can expand, but the pace that your business will grow will potentially be slower than the $40,000. So you gotta be very careful of like how you strategize it. Like Jason said, do product research more carefully because that's something that you can do cheaply and it's just your time, right? So like maybe, you spend a few days or a few weeks, it doesn't really cost you a dime in terms of like monetary wise, but then you have a higher success rate with the limited resources you have in this scenario.
Thanks both for the walkthrough and the explanation. So now we will get into the individual budget categories and items. So firstly, sourcing. So Krista, I noticed that you allocated a sample cost for 5 samples. So is my understanding right that you will start with one product first, but you may need to budget for up to 5 samples? Maybe you can explain that?
Yeah.
Hold on. You want to go back to the...
Yes.
Yeah, so I would always get more samples than one, right? Because with one, you really don't have any comparison, not just a product quality, but also different suppliers. In terms of their level of services, which is extremely important if you wanted to build a long-lasting relationship with them. And kind of like the ins and outs, like for example, they ship you a sample, you give them feedback, how they act on that, whether they're on top of their qualities, etc. Like you wanted to have enough number of samples to test both the product and services from your supplier. So I would say that would be my approach for every single product I have.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. So one of my products, for example, has components that are fabric-based, and I got 3 samples. So at first I thought I'm going to go with supplier A because their price is the lowest. But when the 3 samples, at the time I actually still operate out of my home. So they arrive, I open them in my spare bedroom, and like, whoa, the smell from the thing was horrendous. So I like, okay, forget about supplier A. If this is their sample quality, it comes with like such a stench. There's no way I'm going to use them. And then I ended up like comparing supplier B and C and going with one of them. So yep, getting multiple samples is actually really important.
Yeah. And there's another thing I want to demystify here a little bit. Like people, so I mostly work with Chinese suppliers. First of all, I'm Chinese, so it's very easy for me to communicate with them. And the second one, like when you work, there's so many different factories in China, right? Even for the same kind of product. And the way they do things is very different as well. So some of them might be more resourceful. Like, for example, now I'm developing a product completely from scratch, right? And then you can see their process. Like some of them, if they are less business savvy, they will give you a much more expensive solution instead of thinking about if there's a cheaper way to do it, maybe 80, 90% of the quality, right? So all these things, like can determine in the end, maybe like you can get a cheap and also good quality product. Like sometimes expensive products aren't necessarily like the best kind of quality. It's just that people aren't really thinking about it, so that they choose the easiest and the most expensive solution for you.
Very good points from the both of you. So I think I know you mentioned it briefly just now, Jason. So for you, you mentioned that if you had $40,000, you would launch 5 products at once. So maybe you can just quickly repeat that point on why 5 instead of focusing on 1 when you have $40,000.
I think Crystal alluded to hedging your bets and not having all your eggs in one basket. So that's one reason. The other thing is I actually like to launch complementary products or products that have some kind of relationship to one another. And the reason is it's very effective for marketing. So you can create a storefront on Amazon, for example, where you showcase a range of products. And then you can, on Amazon, if you're brand registered, you can do virtual bundling. So you can do, for example, if you sell like forks, then you can bundle it and another listing of knives. You can do a virtual bundle of forks and knives and double your market basket value when people check out. And another reason is it's just helpful sometimes for economies of scale. For example, let's say I want to do samples for 5 different products. I usually get them all to an agent that I would use in China. They will consolidate the samples from, let's say, all my suppliers. They pack it all into one box and DHL it all to me for $40. And the sample cost is sometimes all free. So that's very helpful rather than I go to, let's say, like do 5 shipments separately and pay like $50 per shipment. So that's one thing. Yeah, those are some of the reasons why I would do multiple products.
Great. Yeah, so there are so many reasons. So apart from putting your eggs into more, having like different diversifying your risk. There's also about upselling, cross-selling, and also economies of scale. So now I also noticed that you added and allocated a cost for inspection. So why is that important?
I have had shipments. When I was first starting out, I remember 2014, I made a coffee filter. And then I shipped directly from the factory in China. I just found it on Alibaba. I've not used Alibaba now for more than 10 years. But back then, I would go onto Alibaba, I found a supplier, I said, okay, contacted a few. And then they shipped my first order to the US. I, at the time, used a 3PL in California to receive it. And the 3PL in California got back to me, took pictures of the shipment they received and said about 20% of the products are like, blah. Like cannot make it, they're all like broken or something. Yeah, so lesson learned. Another lesson was, I went to Yiwu in China. I ordered 20,000 ponchos. They were really cheap, like 10 cents each, okay, so the cost is not that high. But because I have people on the ground in China acting on my behalf, these 20,000 ponchos were delivered to them. And then they messaged me on WeChat and said, hey, Jason, your thing just arrived. We'll check it and get back to you. And the next day I get a message and they basically said, Jason, all the ponchos are CMI, cannot make it. They are much thinner than the quality, the thickness you specified. And then that whole batch was returned to the manufacturer and I got my 30% deposit back. So if I did not have people on the ground double checking the quality, wow, that would have gone to Amazon. People would have gotten the ponchos, they put it on, it rips everywhere, 1,000 holes, and I would have gotten my first 10 one-star reviews. And then what happens to the listing? It will be dead in the water forever. And I'll have 20,000 unsellable ponchos.
Thank you for sharing this lesson.
I wanted to add on, so like I actually didn't add the inspection cost, but definitely I think I just forgot, but you definitely need to do inspection. And I do inspection every single batch. Doesn't matter how long that I've been selling the product for, I always inspect every single batch. And I also wanted to share a story of inspection. So there's an inspection company I've been using for years. And I met them in person, we have a good relationship, but one day I saw my supplier and he told me that essentially one of the inspectors asked him for money. So he said that if you don't give me this much money, then I'm gonna say that your batch failed, right? So that's actually a very unethical situation. I needed to go to the inspection company, which I have a very good relationship with, and then essentially they fired that guy and then not charge me for the whole month of inspection fee. But these kind of things can happen, especially in a market like China, where like a few $100 might not be a lot for people in Singapore, but it is quite a bit, right, for people there. So they are incentivized somehow to do these kind of things. So you just need to keep an eye on it, and also make sure that you have a good relationship with both suppliers and your inspectors, so that they can communicate, they feel comfortable communicating with you about these kind of issues.
关系 is really important. I have production in China. I also have production in the US, in Australia. I've worked with producers in India, in Kenya. And for me, it's always about building a good long-term relationship. And because I have a good long-term relationships with all my service providers and suppliers, many of them will bend over backwards. Most of my orders now from China, I don't pay a deposit. In fact, all my orders from China, I never pay a deposit anymore. I just drop them a message on WeChat, say, hey, I want blah, blah, blah amount of this. Give me the production lead time. They'll get back to me, and then they will start producing it. And then when it's done, they'll just let me know. Because we have built that long-term relationship. Same with all my US service providers. Many of them will go the extra mile because they see me as a trustworthy, reliable client.
Great, thank you so much for sharing the lessons. I think there are a lot of valuable lessons and key findings that the both of them have shared. So now we'll move on to the next category. So it is FBA, logistics, and shipping fees. So quickly share with us what are some of the elements under shipping fees.
Okay, so the elements under the shipping fee, I didn't include the FBA fees in it because to me that is a variable cost. So you only pay the FBA fees if you sell units of your products, right? So essentially in my calculation, I didn't have it as an investment. But so for my fees, it's mostly the first mile, which is from your supplier to say the states are stateside. And then together with the last mile, which I usually use like UPS and FedEx, these kind of solutions to the FBA warehouse, and that whole thing includes like customs as well in the US, and the commercial insurance, shipping insurance. Usually the shipper adds on top of it.
Yep, I agree with Crystal in my budgeting thing there. I also excluded FBA fees by default. By the way, do you all understand what we mean when we say FBA fees? Okay. Anybody don't understand? Okay. So that's when your goods are stored with Amazon, and when we refer to FBA fees, it's Amazon delivering to the end customer. So we don't calculate that in our budget because that's not our out-of-pocket expense. If you think about it, it's actually paid for by the customer because you mark up your FBA fees into the price of the product and offer free shipping, okay? So it's not paid from us, so I don't need to budget for it. Yep, so what carriers did you...
Sorry?
Any, I think one...
What carrier do I personally use for the first mile? Yeah, I have a Chinese shipper that I've been using for years, but I usually compare, I have a few of them, so sometimes for the bigger shipments, I would compare the price, but I don't use any shipper outside of China so far, but I think Jason has a pretty good recommendation.
Yeah, I've actually recommended a few services to Crystal over the years. Like,
that's right.
So, last year I attended a seller conference in Sydney where I heard of a service for the first time. And the owners, when they shared, I actually stood up in the crowd. I was sitting right at the back corner, 400 people. I stood up and I shouted, "That's a game changer!" because I've been shipping like 10 years. This is a solution. One of the huge pain points for sellers like y'all is figuring out, wow, how do you even get your stuff from the manufacturer to Amazon in the US or UK or wherever. When I first started out selling in 2013-14, I remember I looked at all the customs Incoterms, EXW, FOB, and then like, what? I need a customs brokerage. I need to pay customs bond? Like $2,000 or whatever. Like, what in the world is all this? I do not know how to figure this out. It took me in the end, I sent one small parcel via the postal service, which cost me $400, but it took me 2 weeks to fill up a one-page customs form because I had no clue what any of the terms meant. After that, I mean, I've sent thousands literally of shipments to Amazon FBA now. But last year, I heard about this service that was launched called SKU Drop. And what they have is they have a warehouse in China where you can store your goods at half the price compared to FBA storage. So I ship all my made in China goods and store in that warehouse in China with SKU Drop. And then their system is API integrated with Amazon. If you've ever shipped with Amazon, you know it's quite complex to create a send to Amazon shipment. Create shipments, download labels, send PDF to freight forwarder, call customs broker, coordinate with your manufacturer, etc. This now makes it like literally 2 clicks, 5 seconds. The labels are all auto-generated, printed in the warehouse. Everything is shipped to Amazon, tracking numbers all uploaded. It literally is like 10 times faster. I just told my wife this morning, you know, this literally makes it 10 times easier for me to ship stuff. And it also saves me money because I don't have to ship like 6 months worth of stock at a time. I literally now ship 1 week's worth at a time. Every Monday morning I wake up and I ship whatever was sold in the last 7 days to replenish my stock. I'm like, wow, this is crazy. So I actually approached them when Natalie, they all told me about the Seller Summit and the team that's organizing this. I said, I actually have a service provider I use and I thought I'd introduce them and see if they are willing to come here. No, but I think one of the things I often do is, if you all have attended the last few Amazon events, they've been getting my US lawyer to come and do the US IP thing because my US lawyer is actually one of the top in the whole of the US. But she's so reasonable. I've had so many clients come to me like they use a cheap service and it's rejected by the USPTO. My lawyer looks at it, immediately she understands what the problem is and she's able to get their trademark or patent pass like where everyone else has failed. And that's because she used to be the chairman of the bar for the IP department in the US. She's considered like probably the top 10 IP lawyers in the US.
How much does she charge for her service?
Of course, yeah, she charges, but her rate is actually the same as any like IP accelerator lawyer. Yep. So.
I think thanks for sharing. I think like, you know, apart from SKU Drop, you also mentioned that for the first mile delivery, you use like, you know, those major international carriers like FedEx or, you know, all these other carriers. So, you know, some of the sellers, they say, okay, these logistic partners are, you know, costly. So what are some strategies for you to reduce your cost of shipping?
I think if you're shipping from Singapore, then that's it. You don't really have much option. It's not really cost efficient to ship from here. If you're shipping from overseas, I mean, you can try working with freight forwarders. Like when I ship from India, I would have to coordinate the freight forwarder with a US customs broker, and then the freight forwarder gives the wrong tracking number. And then the customs broker cannot figure out where the shipment is. Then I have to come in between and coordinate for all of them. And then the Indian customs actually wanted a bribe from me in order to stamp the customs form, and I refused to pay it. So my shipment was stuck in the port of Calcutta for 6 months. So you have to deal with all these kinds of things, but some of the ways to reduce costs, for me, it's go with something that is reliable, because in the long run, you will save. I have tried to skimp on shipping before. So I remember when I tried to ship from Singapore once, when I was testing products, I went to NTUC Fair Price. I bought a carton, I bought 50 packs of Dilmah tea. And the Fair Price auntie was like, why are you buying so much Dilmah tea? I said, oh, I have a business. Because I was buying it for $4 Sing here, and I was selling it for 20 Great Britain pounds in the UK. I put them into a box. I went to SingPost because it was $40 cheaper than DHL. But you know what? SingPost delivered it to Amazon. Amazon says, we refuse to sign the customs form. Singpost Courier Express Post Service doesn't provide power of attorney for delivered duty paid. So Singpost called me and said, we can't hand over to Amazon. They refuse to receive it. They won't sign for the customs form. So I said, then how? Singpost said, we either throw away your carton or we send it back to you, and that's another $400. And then you ship it back again, it's another $400. So now it's $1,200 for one carton of tea. I should have just gone with DHL, paid the extra $40 and get it done.
Yeah. So,
I would agree with Jason on that. Like shipping is, I don't think it's something that you should like save cost on, especially when you're starting off. Now, when you're at certain scale, you can have, you know, like a department or somebody who's just optimizing your shipping costs, right? Like your inventory optimization, and then they can time, you know, which is a good time to ship, because shipping price fluctuates every week as well. And then they can see based on your inventory storage fee and like your shipping fee, like what is the minimal, you know, cost you can incur by shipping what quantity at what time. But like when you're first starting off, like this is not something like Jason said, like you want to like mess with, right? Because like once, if your shipper lost all your products, or like say if it's not shipped on time, then the amount of expense like the, you know, you're incurring is a lot, right? So I remember like one Christmas, we had 6 figures worth of products. And for some reason, my producer were like, oh yeah, like I already chose a shipper and that was reliable. But she was like, you can save, you know, whatever amount of money by choosing the other shipper. And I had no idea who that shipper was. I just knew that they told us that, you know, we can save money on it. And then we used them, and it turned out that entire, like the whole shipment that's worth 6 figures, you know, most of the products gets blanket. When they reach the customers, it was all wet with molds. And I had no idea like how it happened, where it happened. And so eventually we need to recall the products and inspect them one by one, and that costs us a lot of money. Obviously we had some kind of insurance with the shipper, so that mitigated a bit, but you never want to go through that kind of headache, especially when you're first starting off. You want to like laser focus on your sale and your profitability, yeah.
yeah. So I think the key takeaway here is that even when if you try to like save on shipping and then you choose like random, you know, service providers, you think that you're saving money, but maybe actually in the end you're spending more. So, you know, be careful, choose the reliable shipping partners. So moving on to trademark and administrative or branding costs or fees. So why are these important?
Okay, I think if you are wanting to build a brand on Amazon, right, because I always say the real long-term value in selling on Amazon is your brand. Your brand is the thing that is your business asset. Just like in Singapore, you all understand property investing. Your property is an asset. So in commerce, in business, or on Amazon, it's the brand. So you want to get that right. And the other thing I often say is, when you are brand registered on Amazon, Amazon gives you superpowers. I call them Amazon brand superpowers, compared to like a regular seller that is not brand registered. So if you're not sure what brand registry is, you can go find out more.
Yeah, so it is very important to have a trademark, as Jason said. You know, like it gives you a whole suite of tools you can use on Amazon, especially if you're brand registered, and you need to have a trademark to be brand registered. And it's also more important, I believe, to select a good lawyer. Now, if you don't have the money to select a good lawyer, then you need to have some, you know, legal knowledge yourself, right? Because I'll give you one example. Like one of the brands I have, and the trademark, we actually went through, kind of funny, because we went through Amazon IP Accelerator. We used one of their law firms, and they're not cheap, but the partner of the law firm, I guess they're just not doing a good job in terms of researching the viability of registering, apply for this trademark. So it turned out a year after, once we already had a presence online, and you know, we're on like magazines and stuff like that, and our trademark wasn't registerable. Like basically, we need to fight, you know, for another few years to fight for a chance of us registering a trademark. And that is something that when we are selling our brand was heavily questioned by the buyer, because that is an IP, asset they're purchasing from you. But if they cannot register that to them, that is a devaluation of your business, right? So I think if we just chose like a more diligent lawyer initially, or maybe just do a little bit more research ourselves, we can avoid that whole headache for a few years to come.
I know we are running out of time, but I think you saw on the screen that Crystal had a 7-figure exit after 1.5 years. So how it works is if you build a brand, it starts generating good revenue and profit. Essentially, there are companies out there that are looking to acquire brands. The thing that they want to buy is your brand. So if you're in this to really build assets and value and wealth, then you really need to zoom in and focus on I am building a brand or I am building a few brands.
Yep. So it's the long-term goal, of building a brand, and that's why it's important for to differentiate your brand and your products against other products on Amazon. So maybe very quickly on compliance, I noticed that you did not allocate any costs. So Jason, maybe share. Is it because your category doesn't require any compliance? Yeah.
Actually, my category does require compliance. One of the category, I'm in like maybe 5, 6, 7 categories. One of them is beauty, which does require some compliance. But I put 0 because I often advise people who are starting out, just go with something that doesn't require compliance. If you already have a limited budget, you have limited experience, then just pick something like that's a low-hanging fruit kind of thing. Don't try to be over complex.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I saw in the beauty category, and let me tell you, it's a headache. It's a hustle, as Elon Musk said.
Some of my listings constantly get deactivated because Amazon keeps changing their algorithm. Then you have one keyword that the bot doesn't like, and then your listing is taken offline, no warning. And then after that, you have to deal with seller support to try to get it reinstated.
Okay, so lastly, could you share the rationale behind your allocated advertising budget?
Okay. So if you look at both my purple and blue slide, the 40 and 10,000 total budget, I actually allocated exactly 15% of the total budget to Amazon ads. And the reason for that is based on my experience, my total advertising cost of sales often ends up at about 10 to 15%. Meaning if it's 10% cost, total advertising cost of sales, then every $10,000 I spend, I usually have about 100,000 equivalent in sales. Of which, at the moment, the last time I looked, maybe it varies between 40% plus minus of my total sales is usually from advertised sales, and then the rest is organic.
Yeah, so I agree with Jason. So if you look at my columns there, it's 10% TACos, which is total advertisement cost of sales, as Jason said. I do think that you might perhaps need a little bit more initially, the first few months, while you're trying to establish your listing. So that number will go higher. And also this number has a trend of kind of increasing over the last few years. So just 3-4 years ago, my TACos was 2-3%. I mean, that's a huge, that's a very good number. But now I think as Jason said, 10-15%. It's something that you could expect, and when you're launching, you should probably have 20, right? Depends on how aggressive you are. But then it doesn't hurt to allocate more money into ads and marketing, especially when you're first establishing yourself.
Yeah, actually, that's a very common question I get. When I do training, people always ask, how much budget should I allocate for advertising? It's very hard to give a number because there's so many variables. Number one, is the niche product type you pick highly competitive, or is it very low competition? If it's very competitive, then you need to generally bid relatively high for ads. But if it's a low competition kind of niche, then your advertising bids will be relatively low. Yep.
That's something you should also research in your market research stage to find out the ads cost so that you're prepared for it, that you don't get a sticker shock, right? When you're launching it and you're oh, I didn't know that I need to pay $10 per keyword click. I mean, then...
Yes, I remember the first time my wife, who she runs part of our sales. I handle Amazon US, she handles the rest. When she saw the first time we got an accountant to do when we incorporate a company some years ago, she saw that I spent over 6 figures just on Amazon ads. She was like, what? You spend how many hundreds of thousands on Amazon ads? I'm like, yeah, but it generates like 10 times of that in sales. And importantly, you must have good profit margin so that you have enough margin to buffer for ads and still be profitable.